All right, this is how to make a mask hood without using a pattern, very simply with a sewing machine and a rectangle of fabric. So first of all, the fabric, you choose the fabric you want. This fabric I have is kind of like a terry cloth. It's kind of smooth on one side, and then the other side, which will be the side showing on the when you put it on your mask, is kind of more fuzzy. So the first thing you do, basically if you go to a fabric store, if you get 1 yard of fabric, that will be enough, more than enough, for one hood using this method. So once you get that yard of fabric, you're going to cut it. The size I use is 38 inches long by 19 inches wide. And if you want your hood to be a little longer, basically you would just make the 38-inch measurement longer. If you want your hood to be a couple inches longer, you want it really long, you could do 40 inches or 45 inches. You know, it depends on how much material you want to use, what kind of hood you're trying to cover. But this size works pretty good for an average size, you know, human head size, a little bit bigger than a human head. Works good on skulls, that type of thing. So the first thing you're going to do, once you have your fabric, you have it all cut and sized, the first thing you're going to fold over the front. This is going to be the front seam of your hood, and make sure that you have the side of the fabric, you know, if your fabric has two different sides to it, make sure the side that you want the outside of the hood to have is on the bottom, because you're going to fold it over, you're going to sew it, and then you're going to flip it over. That's going to be this is going to be the outside of your hood. This is the inside. So this front flap, you're going to want to fold it over. The size I use is, I do about 1 3/4 inches to 2 inches. So just to make it easy, I'm going to do 2 inches. This is like, this ruler is like you can get it at a sewing joint fabrics, or probably on Amazon, wherever you want to get it. I believe it's for knitting. I don't remember what this ruler is for exactly, but it's very helpful. It has all these, it's 2 feet long basically. And it has all these inches. It's really easy for measuring out. You know, you just need a couple inches. And you don't want to use a tape measure that's all flappy and flapping around. All right, so I'm trying to get 2 inches. And then once you get 2 inches all the way across. Now this fabric isn't precisely cut. It might be a little, you know, bit off here and there. And this fabric is kind of, it tends to move a lot and stretch a lot. So the thicker your material is, the easier it'll be to use. If you're using like a felt or something like that, sometimes it moves around too much, but you know, you can work. You just got to get used to dealing with it and learn how to manipulate the fabric. All right, so we got about 2 inches all the way across. Try to get it as even as you can. If it's not perfectly even, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's a monster mask hood. You know, if you're making a hood for like a $500 mask or something like that, then definitely take your time and make it as precise and perfect as you like. Since this is for a video, it's just going to be kind of quick and dirty. So now I'm going to pin this area so when I sew it, it doesn't move. So basically, when you put the pin in, you're just going to pin it so this edge won't move around on you. And like I said, this fabric is kind of likes to move a lot, so sometimes it does move somewhat, and by the time you get to the end when you're sewing it, it tends to shift a little, but it'll all work out in the end. And just, you know, pin it about every 4 or 5 inches or so. And the pins I use, these are glass head pins. I guess the glass head pins, if you hit them with your sewing machine, they won't break. And they seem to be pretty sturdy. That's what I've been using ever since I learned to sew. And once again, this video is not a lesson in sewing. I actually took a community college class on sewing to learn how to sew. And I made like a pillowcase and a tote bag, something like that. And that gave me the skills enough just to basically to learn how to thread the sewing machine and just sew basic items. And that's really all I needed to start making the hoods. And the hoods basically came from, you know, comparing it with hoods I have in my collection, whether they're from Trick or Treat Studios or Be Something Studios or Zagoni or Don Post. I just kind of took elements of a lot of hoods, and after making different versions of this is what I finally kind of ended up using. All right, so now this is all folded over, and once again, like I said, make sure the part of the material you want your outside of the hood to have is on the bottom. So when you fold it over, you should see the part that's going to be the outside of your hood, even though this section here will be on the inside, if that makes sense. All right, so now I'm going to seam this front. So I'm going to shift the camera over here to the sewing machine. It's really kind of hard to see exactly what's going on, but I'm trying to do my best here. So I don't have any kind of fancy sewing machine. This is just a Singer heavy-duty sewing machine. Basically, the stitching for the width, I have it on 0 for the width, which is this little kind of skinny knob on top. It usually says width. And then the length, which is this big knob here, length I have it about 2.5. And then this type of stitch, I just have it on kind of a basic stitch. Yeah, and the thread color I'm using, usually I use black and orange for Halloween because I like those two colors together, but on this I'm just using what I have in there, which is blue and black, which is fine. You know, you don't really see the stitching anyway. So basically you're gonna get the front of your material in there. You're gonna put the foot down. And once again, this is not a sewing tutorial, so if you want to learn how to set up your sewing machine, you're gonna have to check out another video. There's tons of videos online for that. So basically, I'm ready to sew. You just want to make sure when you start sewing that you back stitch on the edge, back stitch so you don't have a loose seam. And as you're going, you want to pull these pins out so you're not running them over with your sewing machine needle, because they can break pretty easily if you hit it just the right way. All right, so let's get started. The foot is down. All right, so I'm gonna start sewing, back stitching. I'm gonna stop to pull this pin out. And if you have one of these magnetized pin holders, it works. It comes in handy, trust me. If you don't want to be stepping on pins for years to come, definitely pick one up. All right, so let's go on. And stopping to pull out the next pin. like I said, this material is really soft and it stretches a lot too. So sometimes it gets a little wonky, but once the hood is on, it's all sewed together. It really is not that noticeable. Pulling out the next pin. Pulling out the next pin. We're almost about halfway there. The next pin. See, it's starting to get a little bunched up now because the material is moving on me. So I'm just going to pull this pin out so I can, once, it doesn't really matter, because if it starts to bunch up on you a little bit because your material is too soft, you can kind of adjust it, and once you get it sewn all the way to the end, you can just cut off the excess that may be at the end now, because once you fold over your sides and sew those seams, you're not going to see it anyway. It's getting really bunched up now. It's more bunched up than it ever has for me. And if it gets too bunched up, you might have to just kind of readjust it a little bit. There. Alright, you're going to make sure when you get to this end, you want to back stitch. Okay, and then make sure before you pull your material out, you have this thing is up, pull up your foot, pull it out, cut the thread. All right, and there you have your front seam, and I have a mask here. This is just kind of a generic blank mask I have handy, and keep it handy when you're on the sewing machine so you can just slap it on the mask and see how it's working out. All right, so you can see that's the front, your front seam, and then you see in the end, you need to trim this off because it got really wonky on the end there. All right. So the next step, I'm going to trim that excess off really quick. This one kind of got bunched up, kind of twisted a little bit, which I don't really like. If I was making a hood for somebody like this and this happened, I'd probably have to start over, but since this is just a how-to video, I don't want to start over. So there's the end. I just trimmed it off. All right, so now you have your whole front seam, and if you sewed it too far away from the edge and you have a lot of excess, you can trim that down if you like. All right, so let's go back over here. Now we're going to do the side seams. All right, and again, same thing. This is the inside of your hood. This is your front seam. This is the front seam. Okay, so this is the inside of your hood. This is the outside of your hood. So now we're going to do the sides. And basically just fold the side over. And the sides, I do them about 1.5 inches. You know, again, if you don't want that much of a seam, you know, do 1 inch. Or if you don't even want a side seam, you don't have to do one. You can just leave it just the raw material if you like. This is just, it just makes it look a little nicer, that's all. Alright, so see if I can get 1.5. And again, the more precise your cutting and your sewing is, the easier it is to measure too. Like I said, this material it likes to move around on you a lot, so if you're using something thick, you probably won't have too much of a problem. Alright. Still a little too big. It's about 1 3/4. I don't want it that big. Okay, it looks like it's getting close to 1.5. Still a little too big. Grab my pins. I'm gonna go ahead and pin this top area so it doesn't keep moving on me. And make sure when you pin it, you're going through the top all the way through and back up through to the other side. Make sure you get all the material when you're pinning it. Alright, same thing, just check the size. Still a little big. If you're using a really thick material, sometimes it's hard to pin it and get it all in there, but if you want it to stay in place, it's kind of what you got to do. All right. So 1.5 is about right there. So that's about the length I'm trying to go. And it looks pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and pin it all up. And usually if you're putting the pins in, if you have a hard surface like a sewing cabinet or maybe glass tabletop, something like that. That's not gonna scratch the wood or anything like that. So I'm using this folding measuring piece, but this is cardboard, so sometimes the pins like to stick in there. All right, so now I got the side all pinned up. Let's just head over to the sewing machine. Sew the side. Grab my pins. And then also when I sew, I try to put the pins in towards the seam, and then make sure I do it that way so when I put the material in the sewing machine, there's not a lot of material bunched up on this side. Everything is on the outer, away from the sewing machine, so you don't have to try to, sew while you have all the material bunched up in here. So it's easier, you have everything out going this way. And then if you put your pins in, starting from right to left, as your sewing machine foot and needle gets close to them and you pull them out, it's much easier because you can get to them easier than you can when they're on the left side. All right. You might have to, now this front part is kind of thick now because you have the front and the side folded over. So you might have to lift your foot up a little bit. See, let's get this thing back there. You might have to lift that up a little bit to get it under there. So then once you got it, I'm going to pull this first pin out because it's right underneath the needle at the moment. All right, I'm going to try to do this one a little straighter than I did the front. All right, so the foot is down. Always make sure before you start sewing, you put the lever down, keep your foot down, because if you start sewing with the foot up, the thread's going to go crazy, and then you have to kind of sometimes rethread your needle, or just jacks up everything. All right, so the foot is down. We're ready to go. I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to stop to pull out the next pin. Pulling it out. Kind of adjusting the fabric, make sure it's straight. Usually your sewing machine should feed it too and help you keep the material going, but sometimes you really have to guide it. Okay, stop pulling out the next pin. Pulling out the next pin. Pulling out the next pin. And I'm at the last pin. I'm going to pull it out. Backspacing. And backspace on my sewing machine is just this little lever. It says reverse. So when you get to the end, because you have your foot pedal underneath, that's what makes the sewing machine go forward. And so while you're still going forward, you just hit the reverse button. That's your back stitch. The back stitch pretty much just goes over and locks the stitch of the seam so it doesn't just come loose. All right, so we got that. So then you want to turn the wheel towards you, make sure the little dinosaur head guy, that's what I call it, comes up. And then you can lift your foot up, pull out your material, cut the thread. My sewing machine has a thread cutter here. If yours doesn't, just get some little scissors or big scissors, whatever you want to use. And you can just cut it that way if you need to. Usually when you're done with each section, also cut off these big threads. You don't want a bunch of threads all over everything, because once you start sewing stuff together, you know, it just looks kind of crappy. So forgot to do that on the first seam, so I'm going to do it now. All right, and hold on. Thread was just kind of coming loose right there. All right, so now we have the front. We got the front seam, and we have the side seam. And again, you can see there's this little extra section. So you can just clip that off. And this material sheds a lot when you cut it too. All right, so then we have the mask. You can kind of slap the hood on here. And you turn it this way, you can kind of see, get an idea how it's going to look. This is your bottom seam, the side seam. All right. And you can see it's a little twisted because the material got kind of bunched up. But if your material doesn't get bunched up, you won't have that problem. It'll be flat. So unfortunately it happened this time, but it's all right. All right, so now done with that side. I'm gonna pin the other side. And same thing. And once again, if you sew it too close to the edge, or not close enough to the edge, and you have a bunch of excess bunched up here, you can trim that down with your scissors. Get this thread hanging over there. All right, so now we got this side done, we got the front done, and we're gonna do this side. And it's the same thing as before. I'm gonna do about 1.5 inches. Like I said, if you don't want it to be as big, you can do it shorter. Or if you don't want a side seam at all, you don't have to have one. This just makes it look a little more finished, a little nicer. All right, and this time I'm going to go from the bottom to the front, or the back to the front. When we did this side, it was going this way, so I started at the folded part where the front and the side were folded together, so it was thicker. So this time, because I want to put this side in my sewing machine going this way, we're going to start from the back to the front when we pin this side. All right, so it seems like one side is always easier than the other side. I think this side usually is easier to measure for some reason. I don't know why. Pin the front so it doesn't keep moving on me. I think it's pretty good as far as the measurement. Excuse me. It's about 1.5 inches. Again, you can put your pins like every 3 or 4 inches. Yeah, maybe with this material, since it moves so much, I probably should put more pins in it. Maybe it wouldn't bunch up on me, but it seems to be okay, usually. And just, again, make sure you're going in the top all the way through outside the bottom and back up and then over. So it's, you got both sides of the material pinned. Otherwise it's going to move all over on you probably. Alright, so now this side is all pinned up. Let's take it over to the sewing machine. Pins. Okay. Get my material under there. Get as nice and straight as I can so it's not all going crazy on me. And you want to try to get it as close to the edge as you can. Alright, so I got my foot down, ready to go. Don't forget the back stitch when you start off. Pull out this pin. I could just run over these pins, but my sewing teacher told me a story that one of her students ran over a pin. The needle, sewing machine needle broke, and if she wasn't wearing glasses, it would have hit her right in the eye. I wear glasses, so it's not really that big of a deal, but I don't really want to break another sewing machine needle. So that's the reason why I pull the pins out. I don't want to take any chances. The less I have to change stuff or move stuff, the better. I just want to turn it on, sew, and be done. I don't have to do any maintenance and cleaning out thread, fixing stuff. I don't want to deal with any of that kind of stuff. You just want to make sure everything's working right so you can sew, get your hood sewn, and then you're done. Taking out another pin. Alright, so I got one pin left, and I'm getting to the thick part now where I have the side and the front folded. So sometimes you got to do this area with a little bit of care because you don't want it to get too out of shape, because you don't want to have to cut this part off or anything like that. So make sure you always backspace over it. Alright. Oh, and then there's the last pin, which I actually ran over. Forgot to take it out. But luckily it didn't break. So let me trim off the threads, the excess threads. Use the scissors at work. Alright. And hopefully this video is loud enough. I have a very quiet voice, so hopefully you can hear me okay. Alright, so now we have the side. We have the front. And we have the other side. Alright, so we can take our kind of mask model over here. Kind of get an idea what it's going to look like. You have your sides, you got the front. All right. So now, here's where it gets a little tricky. So now you have the front seam, the side seams all done. All right, so now you're gonna fold this over to make your hood, because this is gonna be your hood, okay? So you're gonna take it, the 38 inches, the length, you're gonna fold it fold it in half, line up your sides. You know, hopefully they're not too off size-wise. Hopefully you got them close enough. Get another thread here. Let me trim this off. So you just want to line up your sides the best you can. I forgot to cut this off too. All right. So you can see on the edge here how it's not lining up because the material was a little bit bigger than 19 inches on the corners, because like I said, this material stretches a lot, especially when you're cutting it and measuring it sometimes. So, but that's fine because that's going to get cut off anyway. All right, so basically you're going to, you know, line up your front and the sides the best you can. And you want to do this inside out. You want to make sure it's turned inside out. You know, this is the inside of the hood, okay? Because I'm gonna lay it on a template that I made, which has the shape of a hood. So you're gonna end up cutting. So you figure this is the top of your hood. This is the front of your hood. Okay, this is the front of your hood. This is the top of your hood. This is the back of your hood. This is the bottom of your hood. So I'm going to lay it on a template that has basically kind of a shroud or, you know, a ghoul, Grim Reaper shape to it, executioner, whatever, you know, a hood shape. I'm going to lay it on this template, and then I'm going to cut the back in the shape of this template. So basically I'm going to make a big cut this way and maybe a little bit, you know, here, and I'm going to trim that off. Then I'm going to sew it together. I'm going to flip it back over, or back the right way after sewing it, cutting it and sewing it. You'll have your hood, and it'll be shaped like a hood. Okay, so let me just make sure these are lined up fairly good. Okay, this might be kind of hard to see, but this is the template. Okay, so as you can see, it's the size. This is just a piece of poster board, and basically what I did, I took one of my masks from my collection that had a hood on it. I think I used maybe the witch from Halloween 3 or something like that. I laid it down sideways, and then I just traced the shape of the hood just to get a basic shape. You know, I wrote this note on here, look, turn inside out before cutting and sewing, because if you don't turn it inside out and you sew it with your material the wrong way, then you have to start over because you've now sewn your seam on the wrong side. All right, so I'm going to lay this down. Then I have my front. I'm going to line it up. You know, again, this template is a little bit bigger than my hoods actually are, but it just kind of gives me a, you know, instead of just freehanding, cutting it randomly, it kind of gives it more of a uniform shape, because I'm basically using the same size every time. All right, and this, I'm going to trim before I cut it again. I'm going to trim this excess part off because it was a lot bigger. I don't want it to be too mismatched for when I have to pin it back together and start sewing again. All right, so now I'm going to cut. I'm going to find the bottom of my template here. I'm going to have to move this up a little bit. You want to make sure you have all right, so you got the bottom here. All right, it's lined up with my template. And I'm just going to start cutting in the shape of my template. Basically, you're just cutting a big kind of U shape out of the material. And then you can see here, how it's a little bit, the template is a little bit bigger than my material, but it's fine. And then I'm going to keep trimming. All right, now usually at this point, I would take this material outside and shake it because all kinds of fuzzies just start flying, but I'm not going to do that. All right, so now got it all cut. You're going to carefully try to keep it lined up still. Slide out the template. Okay, now you're gonna pin this area together, just like you did on the sides. Now I kind of cut on the top, so you could probably do this without pinning it, but I don't know, I think it's a little easier to do when it's pinned. And make sure when you're sewing it together, because once you get it all pinned, I'm gonna sew this whole seam. I'm gonna sew the whole thing. If the two sides have to be off a little bit, make sure you have them pinned so when you're sewing it, it catches both sides of the material, so you don't have any holes in your seam. Because going back over it can be a real pain sometimes. All right, so now you can see this is all sewn up. And then one more step, which isn't necessary if you don't want to do it, but I like to kind of sew a little pinch in this front area where it's folded in half. So when the hood hangs on the mask, it kind of gives it a little bunched area on the front. And you can experiment with that if you like, or you don't. If you don't do it, the mask is going to be, or the hood, sorry, the hood is going to be more just laying flat across whatever the shape of the head is. If you sew a little seam there, it kind of bunches it up a little bit, so it gives it a little more form, a little more of a point. Now you can also, what I used to do, I would sew kind of some of this really thin foam into the front, and then it would give the hood a real shape. You can do something like that, or you can even put a wire. You really just got to experiment and find out what works best for you. All right, so I'm going to sew this little pinch on the front. And hopefully I don't run out of thread before I finish sewing this whole thing. But I think I'm okay. All right, and then again, just to make sure, I got everything pinned in the back, but I still want to make sure I kind of get everything lined up. All right, so since I cut from the top this way, I'm going to start sewing this way. And then once you sew it, you can trim off any excess that you're going to have from, it'll be on the inside anyway. All right, another thing, since I'm going on such a strong curve here, I'm going to show you a way to do it without having to stop. So basically I'm going to, okay, the cut starts here. So I'm going to start sewing this way. Put my foot down, I'm going to backspace. Pull the pin out. All right, so I'm getting close to the edge here where the very pointy back of the hood is. So I'm gonna, before I get too far, I'm gonna make sure the needle is in the material, and then I'm gonna lift the foot up, and then you can carefully move your material the direction you want to continue your sewing seam. All right, then you bring your foot back down, and you want to do that carefully. You don't want to stretch the material too much either way. All right, so now I can continue, and you don't have to backspace because you didn't cut the thread. You didn't stop the thread, so it's still one continuous seam. I got a pin here. I got to take out. Now I'm getting to the bottom where it's starting to curve back under. All right, so I got another pin to take out. Another pin to take out. Pin. All right. This thing is really moving a lot on me. I'm trying not to let it move too much. All right. I got one more pin. All right, so I'm at the very edge, very bottom. So I'm just going to sew all the way through, and then back stitch. All right. And you cut the thread, so then you can kind of see this is your seam. So then you're going to turn it inside out. And now this is the back of your hood. All right. Like magic, huh? And this is the bottom. You know, maybe some people don't like this kind of point it makes, but I kind of like how when you do it this way, it kind of makes this weird point at the bottom. All right. And here's the pinch we did in the front. So that gives a little more bunch. Okay, then you can trim off all this excess thread hanging off. And then again, on the inside, where you sewed your seam, like you can trim all this off. You can cut all that off. Again, all these threads you have from your seams, you can trim those off. All right, so I'm just going to trim this excess area. Be careful that you don't trim part of your seam off, because then you have to go over the seam, and that sometimes can make the back of the hood not look as as nice. It may have like a weird bunch in it or something like that. All right, I got blue fuzzies everywhere. All right, I'm gonna take this outside and just shake it real quick. Okay. So then you turn it back the right way. Get my model here. Put the hood on there. All right. Let's see. Hopefully you can see that okay. So this is the back of the hood. And this is just a half mask on like a really crappy stand, so it's not going to hang very good on this mask. If you have a full head mask, you know, or a better stand, or have it stuffed at least, it'll take up a lot more room. And you can, you know, pinch the front. You got the little seam there to help it kind of give it a point, so it's not just a U shape. Okay, and then now the next step would be putting Velcro on the front. Usually what I do, I get let's see. Now you can use the Velcro with adhesive and just stick it on there, but that tends to kind of fall off after a while. So I'm just going to cut this real quick so I can. I'm not going to sew it on here, but usually what I do, there's two ways you can do it. You can put, you know, you have your one side. You know, I usually put the rough side of the Velcro on the inside of the front. And I'm not going to sew it, because if you want to sew Velcro on, I suggest getting Velcro that doesn't have the adhesive on the back, because when you sew it, that adhesive is going to get gunk up your sewing machine needle, and then you're going to be hating life. Trust me. All right, so let's pretend. So if I was going to sew this, if I didn't have Velcro if I had Velcro without an adhesive on it, I would take the size I wanted, I would pin it, and then I would sew it with the sewing machine. But just to save time, you know, if you sewed all this, you should be able to sew a piece of Velcro on there, no problem. All right, and then so I'm going to put the rough side on the inside, which is the left side. You know, again, if this is a hood you're not going to be wearing a lot, or putting it on, taking it off all the time, you can use the Velcro with adhesive, and probably better to use black than white, but this is good for the demonstration, I guess. But if you're just going to make a hood, and it's going to be, oops, put it on the wrong side. If you're going to make a hood, because the Velcro, you can't get the industrial strength stuff, and it works pretty good. But if it's a hood you're going to wear a lot, after a while that adhesive might just kind of get weak, and just when you unfasten it, it might just pull it off. All right, so I got the rough side on the inside, okay, and then on the outside I want to take the soft side of the Velcro, and you can usually what you can do is stick the stick it to this one so it's right in the same place, and then line up your areas, and then it'll be matched up. All right, so then you have it Velcroed. See? Or, you know, so this one has the left side overlaps the left side. Now, if you want it to be more symmetrical, you know, say you don't like it that way, you could also do it, you can do it this way. You can put the Velcro pieces just on the inside, stick it together, you know, however long you want it, and have it like this. Yeah, but I kind of like I think this way, you know, it depends on what the look is, you know. No way is really better. I think this is just more kind of traditional for a hood, I don't know. So there you go, and that's the end. That's how you do it. There's the hood. It only took an hour to explain. Hopefully it will work for you. And if you have any questions, let me know. I will do my best to help you out. All right. Thanks a lot.